Hi.
So after spending 8 weeks in France, there are some tips we wanted to share with you.
Starting with driving, from things to do before you leave for France from the UK, right the way through driving in France, including some bits and pieces that you might not be aware of.
And then there's shopping and the trading hours, particularly around bank holidays.
Yeah, and what you can't buy in French shops or supermarkets.
A little bit about language and how that'll help you when you're in France.
And then finally, a top tip, which is tipping in restaurants.
Hope you enjoy.
Hope you enjoy. So in this section, we're going to talk about driving in France from the UK. So there are a number of things that you need to consider before you set off. Firstly, make sure that your insurance company allows for European travel. Most will, and also depending on how long you're travelling across France or the rest of Europe, check how long that insurance is valid for. It's a legal requirement in France to carry proof of insurance, and you also need to have in a glove box or in the car proof of ownership, so your vehicle registration documents are required. Whilst not a legal requirement, I think it's a good idea that you get international breakdown cover. The last thing you need is to have a major fault with your car and you're in the middle of France with no cover and no ability to get it recovered to a garage. Next, you'll need a headlamp converter for your headlights. Then you need a UK sticker on the rear of the vehicle. Many cars have these already on their registration plate. And then also you'll need a warning triangle kit for all occupants of the vehicle. And again, it's a legal requirement that the high-vis jacket needs to be stored in the front of the car, so in the passenger area of the car. It used to be a legal requirement that you carried a breathalyzer kit in the car. This is no longer compulsory, but it is a good idea because the French drink driving laws are much stricter than in the UK. Sat-navs are a major benefit when you're driving anywhere in the world really and you don't know the area, particularly across France and Europe. But do be aware that speed trap detectors are illegal in France, so if you have a sat-nav system and this is active, then do definitely deactivate it, because if the police stop you and it's activated, then you're in for a hefty fine. So we're in France, and obviously there's some rules of the road. Number one is definitely drive on the right-hand side of the road. Do not drive on the left-hand side of the road. You'll, number one, be in trouble, and number two, cause an accident. So it is so easy to forget this, particularly when you first get off a ferry or the tunnel crossing, even though they're really well marked. So number one is drive on the right-hand side of the road. Number two, so obviously you're driving on the right-hand side of the road, so if you're overtaking, then make sure you overtake on the left. Speed limits in France, similar to the UK, obviously in kilometres an hour. So in urban areas it's 50 kilometres an hour. If it's lower, there will be a sign, so sometimes they go down to 30 kilometres an hour. Rural areas are a little bit like national speed limit in the UK, so it's depending on the department, it's between 80 and 90 kilometres an hour, normally 80, and you'd normally expect to see a sign for 90 kilometres an hour if it was any different. Dual carriageways are 110 kilometres an hour, reducing to 100 if it's heavy rain, and then the auto routes, the motorways, are 130 kilometres an hour, reducing to 110 again if it's raining. Top tip for me is, particularly if you've got a more modern car and it's easy to do, is change the setting on your car before you leave, or when you just get into France or Europe, to kilometres an hour, to the metric system effectively, and then it's so much easier to drive within the legal limit. So obviously if you're driving on the motorways, you'll almost certainly had to go through a toll booth in order to get onto the motorway, and they're normally, not always, but they're normally unmanned, and it's normal that you take a ticket when you go through and then you pay by credit card or debit card when you come out. There are some cash payments as well, but only where they're manned, which is quite rare. And beware when you're going through the toll booth, there will be some of the lanes that you go through which will be for telepage only, and those are for people who have a electronic device fitted to their car so that they don't actually have to pay. They've got like a season ticket, if you like. So don't drive up to one of those because you'll cause a traffic jam. And once you're on the motorways, you'll see, I think they're about once every 20 kilometres or so. Sometimes they're less than that. There are various motorway stations, if you like. They're called airs in France. Some of them have the full facilities that you'd expect in the UK in terms of restaurants. They nearly all have picnic areas, toilet facilities, etc. The ability to fill your car up with fuel. There are some, however, that won't have all of the facilities, right down to the minimum is literally a picnic area and public loos. So as you drive up to one of these airs, they will say on signage exactly what facilities there are, and they all have as well advertised fuel prices, so you know what you're paying before you actually pull over. And then as you pass one, it will always tell you how close you are to the next one. Most of the airs that do have petrol facilities will also have electric vehicle charging points. I believe there is an app, we don't have an electric car, but I believe there's an app that highlights all of the locations of electric charging points across every toll road in France. So hopefully that will aid those of you who need that facility. So speeding in France. On all of the autoroutes there are fixed cameras. In France you get plenty of notice, so to be honest, if you get caught by one of the speeding cameras you really haven't been paying attention, because there's a big sign that comes up before every radar that there is. However, there are also a lot of handheld doing spot checks as well, and they will literally pull you over to the road and fine you on the spot. Traffic lights in France, very similar to the UK. The only difference, so it's red, amber and green. The difference is amber isn't get ready to stop, it is actually stop. So it's almost like a double stop. So if it's yellow, you must stop unless you are so close to going through the traffic lights, it would be a danger not to do so. Green's obviously go, and red is definitely stop. Also note, when you are at a traffic light system, there's normally a time indicator which tells you how long you've got to wait before the lights will change. So France has an emissions control legislation as well. It's called Critère, and it means that if you are driving a vehicle into some major cities in France, obviously including Paris, and when I say driving into, the ring roads around these cities will also count for this. You need to get a Critère certificate before you're allowed to drive. There are vehicles that can't get this, so for example vehicles that were registered before 1997, and if that's the case, the strict legal interpretation is that you shouldn't be driving into those areas. As I say, we'll put a link to how you can apply for these. We got caught out. We weren't actually stopped, but we didn't realise until we were halfway through our travels in France that we needed this facility. We logged in online and paid, so that at least if we were stopped, we could demonstrate that we paid for a sticker. Worth noting though that we went in May and it's now September, and the address that we asked it to be sent to still haven't received one. So from the UK, including European postage, the charge for a sticker is €4.61. So not expensive and definitely worth the effort. It's not like the emission zones in the UK where you have to pay in order to go through the zone. It is literally buying a sticker that proves that your vehicle complies to their legislation. There are signs on certainly the bypasses, and the major signs as you enter the cities that are affected will put an image up on the screen just here. Lastly, just signs on the roads in France. So the blue signs are obviously what you would find on the toll roads or the motorways. The green are major roads, white local roads, and if you see a yellow sign, it probably means you're following a diversion.
Hi, and now on to supermarkets, and specifically the opening and closing times. So the majority of shops will open 6 days a week from Monday to Saturday. The opening times are in the norm 9 till 12 and 2 till 7. So watch out for those the 2 hours in the middle of the day when everybody goes to lunch. The larger supermarkets will be open all day. And then on to a Sunday. The larger supermarkets will trade on a Sunday until 1 o'clock. But the smaller shops are likely to be shut. So ensure you check that out before going to shop. And that then takes me to bank holidays. Bank holidays in the UK fall on a Monday or a Friday. In France, they fall on the date, the actual date. So that could mean a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So if you've got a approaching bank holiday, then just check, because the majority of shops will be closed all day, and the larger supermarkets will only be open until 1 o'clock.
So supermarkets in France, very similar to the UK. Julie's already talked about opening times, so obviously make note of those before you try and visit any of them. Biggest difference, I think, is that the majority of supermarkets in France sell largely seasonally only vegetables and produce, etc. So if you want something that's out of season, you're less likely to find it in France, or if you can, then it will be more expensive. You know, for me, that's probably the single biggest difference, and that there's a much bigger focus on local produce. And then the last thing in related to food shopping is bread. And again, I believe it's a legal requirement in France to be able to buy bread daily. So most villages will have its own boulangerie, and so you'll be able to pick up bread on a daily basis, except on a Monday.
French cuisine, one of the major reasons that people will visit France. And the great news is that there are lots of regional specialities. We were in the Dordogne for around 8 weeks, so we got to try some of those specialities. So in the Dordogne, it was all about walnuts, foie gras, duck, and cabicu, a goat's cheese from the Rocamadour area. So when you're eating out, and if you're eating out on a budget, then I would recommend eating out at lunchtime. At lunchtime, in every restaurant, there will be a menu du jour, which is a starter, main course, and a pudding, and maybe even a glass of wine. And usually bread is included. You can just have the plat du jour, which is the main course. This is advertised outside. There's usually either a placard or it's actually on the menu. And then there's French markets, and that's a must to visit a French market. There will be a market in every town in France every week, and there are just stall after stall of local produce. So if you're looking for a picnic, then you can get your bread, your cheese, strawberries, fruit, a feast.
So as you'll know, if you've been following our videos, we did take our Border Terrier Teddy with us to France. The only restriction we had when we were travelling with both Airbnbs did say that you couldn't leave your dog unattended in the accommodation. So where we went, Teddy had to go. And I have to say, there were very few occasions where we couldn't take Teddy with us. They're not allowed into supermarkets, so he had to stay in the car when we visited the supermarket. But outside of that, I would say 90% of the places that we wanted to visit, we were allowed to visit. There were a couple of exceptions. In Carcassonne, we weren't allowed to take Teddy up to the tower walks, but really pretty much everywhere it wasn't a problem. We didn't get turned away from a single restaurant. 90% of the shops that we wanted to go into, you might start standing outside, but they were encouraging you to come in.
Language. So if you're visiting in France, it's always good to have the basics, and whether that be hello, bonjour, goodbye, au revoir, or thank you, merci, then it's good to have. But if things get a little bit more complicated in terms of being able to translate or to speak, then I would recommend the Google Translate app. It is a brilliant app. I use it particularly for menus. and I use the camera. So if you hover the camera over the menu, it will then translate into English. But if you're wanting to speak to somebody, should we have a go? Should we have a go now and see how this works? So I've got this app, English to French. So I'm going to ask some directions. Could you tell me how to get to the station, please? So it does transcribe it, but if I want to speak, I can just press the volume button. Here we go.
Pourriez-vous me dire comment me rendre à la gare, s'il vous plaît?
There we go. A really, really good tool, not just in France, but all over the world. Tipping in restaurants. Well, the good news is that the tip is included in your service charge, so you do not need to pay a tip. Hi, I'm Julie.
And I'm Andy.
And if you've not been following us so far and you've just joined us on this episode, then we have taken a year out to travel. So we've been to the Caribbean,
South America.
We've had some time in the UK, had 8 weeks in France, and at the moment we're in our home county of Northamptonshire, and then we'll be going off to do some more travels towards
Asia.
in Asia. Yeah. So looking forward to that. So I hope you enjoy our videos.